So we're going to debrief on the Pacific Park Animal Hospital customer profile model that we ran as an introductory proof of concept, and we will conclude the conversation with a review of possible next steps in terms of predictive modeling and related targeted advertising campaigns. Does that resonate with everyone's expectations for the call, or does anybody have any questions, comments, observations before we commence with the debriefing?
Nope, that sounds good.
Okay, so there are 4 parts to this report. There is a waterfall report, which describes what we did with the Pacific Park Animal Hospital customer records as we move them through the process. There is a quick summary of potential targeting opportunities down the road. There's a heat map which illustrates the concentration of those customers geographically. Then there's a set of bar charts, and these bar charts are where the heavy lifting occurs in this customer profile model. I will explain what they mean as we go through, but you're going to see this pattern repeated on each of these slides. There's a red and black horizontal bar chart which quantifies customer distribution, and then there's a traffic signal colored vertical bar chart which quantifies penetration index, and you're going to see that's that pattern repeated for each of a set of geographic and demographic criteria, including county, age, household type, etc.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Sure.
Steve, your computer, I think, is echoing. Do you happen to have a headset you can plug in or no?
No, I'll go see if I can find one. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. You want me to start over?
Yeah, I would just keep going. No, I'm with you, and Steve's probably heard this a bunch of times.
Okay. So there's so you're going to have this pattern repeated on each of these slides: red and black horizontal bar chart, traffic signal colored vertical bar chart, each looking at a different variable. And then at the end, we're going to take a look at possible next steps. So where you see this sample only, this is not your predictive model at Pacific Park Animal Hospital. This is one we did for another client, but it illustrates what we would possibly do in follow-on steps. So
okay.
Let's start with the waterfall report. So what this does is it shows that we received a customer database for Pacific Park Animal Hospital of 3,600 customers. We run that through a series of data hygiene, data enrichment, and data deduplication processes, the first step of which is to remove incomplete addresses. So the goal of this is to match on name and address back against our database of every consumer in the US, and where we get a match, we're going to add a bunch of demographics. So we start out with a customer database that has customer name, address, city, state, zip. We're now going to have a database that has name, address, city, state, zip, age, income, wealth, ethnicity, gender, etc., etc., etc. So if we don't have complete and accurate input addresses, we can't have confidence in the match because we match on name and address. So we remove incomplete addresses, and we lost a couple hundred records, maybe 175 records due to address failure. Then what we do is we deduplicate, because we don't want to double count households where you have more than one customer in the database. We only lost a handful of records, so well, about 100 records from 3,400 to 3,300. And then we match on name and address to enrich the data with those demographics. And we got a 64% match rate, which culminates in a net cleaned, deduplicated, matched and appended customer file of 2,147 customers. Just to benchmark that match rate, we have the ability to improve that match rate by increasing the level of fuzziness or flexibility in the matching algorithm. But then when we do that, we would introduce the risk of false positives, and for the purposes of statistical confidence, we want to minimize the number of false positives as long as the match rate is high enough to qualify for the various measures of statistical confidence. That is, statistical validity, reliability, generalizability, and several others. And when that match rate is over 40%, then those measures are high enough for us to have confidence in the model. At 64%, we can have great confidence in the findings from this model. Now, it's all well and good to end up with a customer database of 2,100 nice, clean, enriched customers, but really the key to the modeling is to pull all non-customer prospect households that fall in the same neighborhoods as containing the 2,100 customers. That allows us to compare and contrast these two groups, essentially asking and answering the question, what makes these 2,147 paying customers different from the 2.9 million non-customer prospects who live in the same neighborhoods? How are the two groups similar, and how are they different? Once we understand the similarities and differences between those two groups, then we can use that intelligence in follow-on steps to build predictive scoring algorithms that will bring pinpoint statistical precision to the downstream marketing efforts. So you might think of the 2,100 customers as the numerator in these next set of slides, and the 2.9 million prospects as the denominator when we go to build indexes. I'll show you what I mean by that momentarily. Just to give you a lens into where we might go if we decided to take those 2,900 non-customer prospects and score them to build a predictive model, what we would do is most of the models end up allowing us to pull from the top 2 deciles or the top 20% of the scored prospect universe, which would give us 595,000 prospects. And if we wanted to serve targeted digital display ads to them, then we would end up with cookies appended to about 40% of those, or 178,000, and then we would backfill with address level ad serving, what we call IP geolocation. And so the culmination is there would be about 535,000 highly targeted prospects to whom we could serve ads. You can execute direct mail, broadcast email, outbound telemarketing, etc. We would probably collaborate further with you to apply various demographic filters to that scored prospect list, such as screening to make sure they own a dog or a cat or an equestrian household, etc. But this just gives you a sense of some of the size and scope of the eventual target populations that we might bring to bear in terms of making the findings from this exercise actionable in driving revenue for Pacific Park Animal Hospital. That makes sense? Any questions about all those numbers?
Oh, looks good.
All right, so the heat map is really more of a nice to have than a need to have. In many ways, it just validates that we're at least in the proper neck of the woods. And I believe that the Pacific Park Animal Hospital is headquartered in like South Orange County, so it stands to reason that your customer base is going to come from South Orange County. It lights up red where you have a high concentration. Obviously, there are some folks that are sort of leaking into the Inland Empire and coming from a little north and south of there, but the vast majority of the customers are falling within that close proximity to, I believe, Laguna Niguel.
Okay, can I ask questions while we're on here, or should I be taking notes and ask them when we're done?
By all means, interject whenever it's convenient for you.
Okay, if you go back one screen, if I'm hearing it right, you would have a total high-scoring digital ad targets of 537,000. You know, we're one of my main marketing guys for my company. We're getting really good at Facebook ads, and I mean, I think I'm going to sell my house. We have probably an offer coming in on my house where we're going to sell it off of a Facebook ad where we were getting nothing but crickets and 0 views before doing that, before literally taking the marketing into our own hands over and above your traditional MLS listings. And so I'm not the expert on Facebook, but he told me that Facebook uses 3 big data, companies, and obviously we can really target and streamline and hit things on Facebook. I'm just curious, as far as this is concerned. I mean, maybe you can kind of give me the tie-in between, hey, you can do that on Facebook already, versus the information you're giving here and how this would apply, or correlate or mix, or what does it have to do with Facebook? Are they completely different? Is there anything where you guys are offering kind of the same service? Kind of a weird question, but it's kind of open-ended, but I'll just maybe let you do what you can with it.
So Facebook is one of the ad serving networks that falls in our partnership. I didn't plan to go into all of the details on execution strategies in this debriefing. This is purely sort of objective science in terms of what are the findings from the customer profile model. That being said, we can talk about the persuasive element of the project in follow-on steps. But essentially, what we would do is to digitally cookie the targeted population, right? So of the 595,000 records that fall in the top 2 deciles, and that's probably going to get skinnier than that as we start applying other demographic filters for dog and cat and horse ownership. But ultimately, I would say we would probably find a population of a couple 100,000 highly targeted scored prospects with digital tags. A digital tag is simply a cookie. That would allow us to serve ads to those people when they're on Facebook, or whether they're checking the surf report to go surfing in Newport Beach, right? Or shopping at Macy's. It doesn't matter. If they're online, we don't care where they're online, Facebook or otherwise. We only care that they are online and that it is one of those 178,000 people. And when they're online, then we'll serve ads to them, right? It's a little different than digital retargeting. If I go open up my web browser and I go to Facebook, for example, right, the Direct Marketing Association is trying to sell me an ad to come to their show, which I happen to go to every year. They know that. They're digitally tagged. They've digitally cookied me, and so they're serving ads to me on Facebook. Or I could be checking the surf report, right, in Orange County, in which case then I'm going to get an ad served to me for what's like either Harley Davidson or some, I don't know, something, right? Here, Brixton is trying to serve ads to me. They must digitally tag me somewhere along the line. So it doesn't matter if I'm checking the surf report or my news feed on Facebook, as long as I'm online and as long as I'm not surfing gun sites, tobacco sites, alcohol sites, or adult content, then we can serve ads to all 178,000 of these most highly targeted scored prospects. Right.
Okay.
You can also direct mail them. You can also email them, and you can also execute outbound telemarketing to them to execute a true multi-channel, multi-touch campaign, so that on the day when the ads are being served, the mail piece is hitting their home mailbox and the email is hitting their inbox, and so on.
Okay, great. I hope I didn't mess up this recording by throwing it off topic that way, but maybe we will just let you finish this out, and then we can do a second overview where we kind of go into execution, because I've watched the bowling one that Steve did, and so, but I'm also picking up more on this already just from you going through it. So I'll just let you finish.
Sure,
Sorry for interrupting.
It's okay. You can ask questions anywhere along the way, and there's nothing that's inappropriate that way.
Okay.
All right. So we looked at the heat map. So now let's look at this next set of slides. As I mentioned, you're going to see this pattern repeated on each of these slides. There's a red and black horizontal bar chart that quantifies customer distribution, and then there's a traffic signal colored vertical bar chart that quantifies penetration index. Again, each of these slides looks at a different variable: county, age, household type, gender, etc., etc., etc. Now let me go back to county. and describe what's going on here, and then I'll talk through the findings from each of these. So in this red and black horizontal bar chart, or the customer distribution chart, what we see here is the 2,100 customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital illustrated by the red bars, and then the universe of 2.9 million prospects illustrated by the black bars. And here on the horizontal axis, we simply have the percentage of each of those two files. So obviously, being headquartered in Laguna Niguel, almost 100% of the customers are in Orange County. So it doesn't. This is really sort of a moot slide, right? Let me pick another one so that I can kind of illustrate the indexing with a little bit more relevance. If we take the population of 2,100 customers, again illustrated by the red bars, you see here that it's sort of a bell-shaped curve, right? A little pointy, right? And it peaks here at age range of 45 to 54. It makes up about 1/4 of the customers. In comparison, it only makes up about 18% of that prospect reference universe. Don't mistake the fact that this red bar exceeds its corresponding black bar as being reflective of market saturation. It doesn't. Remember, there's only 2,100 customers, and there's almost 3 million prospects. So we're a long way from reaching anything close to market saturation. In fact, where we see a red bar exceeding its corresponding black bar, that actually represents a statistical sweet spot. And the way we quantify the magnitude of that sweet spot is we divide the customer percent by the universe percent, and we multiply by 100, and we get an index. In this case, 139 for the age range of 45 to 54. What that tells us is that people who are 45 to 54 years old are 1.4 times or 1.39 times more likely than average to become a customer of Pacific Park Animal Hospital. The 55 to 64-year-olds are a little less distinctive from a statistical standpoint, but still nevertheless making up over 1/5 of the customers. It's an important category, even though they live in markets that contain a lot more of those sort of elderly folks, not elderly, but 55 to 64-year-olds. So what we do in this index chart is we color code green the statistical sweet spots. Well, you might think of it as go, give some consideration or caution, and don't target those people. They don't look like your customers. So the real crown jewel of all of the findings in these customer profile reports is the tall green bars. We see lots of tall green bars. Those are the attributes that are most likely to figure into a predictive scoring algorithm if we took it to the next level. That being said, the beauty of the type of scoring that we use, what we call logistic regression, is it simply gives greater or lesser weight to the attributes. It doesn't remove them from the population. So are we going to give a higher weight to people who are 45 to 54 years old, all things being equal? Yes, we are. Are we going to throw out people who are 75 plus or 25 to 34? No, we're not. If they happen to be 75 plus or 25 to 34 and they have the right income, the right family type, like if you look at the income slide, which we'll come to in a minute, you see that it's highly over-indexed for high income. So if they were, going back to the age slide, if they happen to be 25 to 34 or 75 plus, but they made 150,000 plus in income, they could very well receive a score of 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being highest, or what we call the top decile. So that's the beauty of logistic regression, is it is a multivariate scoring methodology that never throws the baby out with the bathwater. So any questions about the distinction between the customer distribution or frequency and the penetration index? Just keep in mind the tall green bars are really going to be the key drivers in the model. We look at, by household type, what we see is that they are nuclear families. About 40% of the households are mom, dad, and kids, and they're indexing at 188. So customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital are 1.9 times more likely than average to be in a family with mom, dad, and kids. Secondarily, and these are probably those 55 to 64-year-olds, they're empty nester couples popping. We look at by gender, it's the mom who's making the decision in the household. Now, we know that the population is not 60-40 men to women. It's more like 50.5 to 49.5 in favor of women. So, but what happens with these, one of the artifacts of compiled data where we derive the demographics is that it defaults to the male head of household for gender when it can't otherwise specify. That being said, even with that anomaly where it tends to default to the male head of household, we're still seeing the 60-40 inverse here, right, where females are dominating. So with an index of 170, you can pretty much say that it's the mom who's making the decision about where animal hospital services are rendered in that family. We look at marital status, and we see that these are married folks, right, about half, compared to only 30% of the population. So indexing at 163, very important demographic. We look at ethnicity, and what we find is that roughly 2/3 of the folks are Caucasian, compared to about half the population as a whole, and so we're over-indexing at 136. We see some high indexes for Island Pacific, but because of the very low frequency, so low that it doesn't even register visually, it is a statistical anomaly, or an outlier we call it. We also see a relatively high index for Jewish, but it kind of fails the threshold test of 5% frequency. If it falls below 5%, it's typically considered a statistical outlier. It is, however, a high enough index that I'm sure Jewish folks and Island Pacific folks are going to get swept up in with Caucasians as the model moves forward to a predictive algorithm. Looking at household income, it's just you have this kind of a little bell-shaped curvy thing going on here from about half, 150,000 up, and then just fully 2/3 of the customers are at the highest income level of 150,000. Part of that is the it's just the nature of that community, right? It costs a lot to live in Laguna Niguel, but even still, the geography of the reference universe is sufficiently broad that we're seeing an index of 354, meaning, again, in layman's terms, customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital are 3.5 times more likely than average to be in the highest income range of 150,000. Wealth is very similar to income. It's a little more useful when dealing with aging populations, because as people retire, their W-2 is going to shrink, but they will still maintain all of the assets and the equity in their home and so forth. And so they could be significantly wealthy even though their income has declined. Even still, fully 80% of the customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital fall in the top 10% of the population by wealth. Even considering the skew that happens geographically as we are falling into a wealthier community, it's still outpaced dramatically by the customer population, so much so that it's indexing at 246. Again, in layman's terms, you could say that customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital are 2.5 times more likely than average to fall in the top 10% of the population, or the top decile by wealth. Education, they're highly college educated. Again, fully 2/3 are college educated with an index of 256, very important characteristic. They have kids in the home, more than half have kids in the home, so they're indexing at 150 compared to the universe. When they have kids in the home, they tend to have the higher frequency is, small families of 1 or 2. but their highest index is at 3. This is just sort of teasing out some additional intelligence in the model. It's not necessarily shouting at us, although the index values are high enough they would probably enter into a scoring algorithm if we took it to the next level. The length of residence, you kind of have this mix of relative newcomers with mid-term folks, but it's really spiking at the high end where about a third or more of the customers have been in their homes for the long length of residence of 15 plus years, indexing at 142. So none of the other categories by length of residence are statistically relevant. Only that 15 plus years, and it's pretty darn significant with a index of 142. When we look
I have just a quick question.
Sure.
So maybe this goes down to the execution part, which is the part where I feel like I need to learn the most. But so let's just say, we're seeing here there's a large amount of people that are, have lived in their home 15 plus years. In the veterinary space in particular, maybe that likely means a lot of them probably have picked their veterinarian already, which is great. They may or may not, if we're going to target an ad, they may or may not be, loyal to them to move over to, a clinic we're marketing to. But there's also, you have the A and the B, which is 1, 2 years, 3 years, where maybe they're still on the fence. They don't have a, 10-year relationship with a particular veterinarian yet. Those might be great to target. Does that, can you separate those out if you work in the execution standpoint? And just how does that work?
The short answer is yes, but I would always caution not to look at a multivariate profile through one variable at a time, or not to make strategy decisions from a multivariate report based on univariate analysis. So now sometimes it's just common sense, right, that your observation is that these folks are joined at the hip, they're hardwired to their current veterinarian. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't advertise to them, especially if they're in the right age range, if they have the right income, etc. Right? Maybe, I mean, people switch all the time from one brand to another in all facets of life through persuasive advertising. So there's no reason why they can't be disintermediated. I mean, I go to the same vet that I've taken my dogs to for years, but I've often thought of switching to one closer to home. People that have been in their homes for 15 years might be going to a vet that was there, so they're traveling a further distance because Pacific Park Animal Hospital may not have been known to them when they first moved in. I'm traveling 10 miles to go to the vet just because that's where I've always taken my dogs, but I'm not particularly loyal to them. I would be perfectly happy to take my dog to another vet if there was one closer to home, and have often thought of doing so.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
But nobody loves their dog more than me, I mean, I was never a dog person, and I got this one for my son, and it ended up being mine just because he thought it was a cool idea to own one until it was time to walk it every day and pick up after it. So it became my dog, but I definitely not married to my vet.
That's awesome.
They're largely homeowners, right? And it's in a community with a fairly strong mix of multifamily dwelling units or renters, where 80% of these folks are single-family dwelling unit owners, right? 100 index of 142 by home ownership, and then 90% of the homes in the community are single-family units, indexing at 127. So you kind of have to be to own a dog. I mean, you can own a dog or a cat and be a renter. People do it all over the world, but it's probably something that's better suited to single-family dwelling unit homeowners. The home values, you might think of this as what we would call a bimodal model from home value. You have these folks that live in more moderately priced homes in Orange County speak. I mean, if you're in Omaha, a $500,000 home is a mansion. In Orange County, it's a nice 3-bedroom, home. And then you have these folks that really live in the nice homes on, whatever, the lakes around there. I think there's like a Lake Forest or something around that area. People that live in Laguna Beach or up Guna Canyon. One thing about that population that's really jumping out at me is that, more than 40% of those customers live in homes where the assessed home value is $750,000 plus, meaning they're $1 million plus homes. Again, $1 million home in Laguna Canyon might be actually a relatively moderate, single-family dwelling unit, a nice, mom, dad, and kids home. Whereas if you put that home in, Riverside, or even 100 miles inland from Laguna Niguel, it could be a big giant 5-bedroom, 5,000 square foot house.
Right.
They are highly direct mail responsive. So the way we get this indicator is we have a data feed, several data feeds into our compiling matrix that come from catalog co-ops, magazine publishing co-ops, and charity co-ops. So if somebody buys a bra from Victoria's Secret or a fleece wear from North Face, or subscribes to Time magazine or donates to the American Humane Association by way of mail, that pings the database. Where the database gets pinged more than once, they're flagged as a multiple direct mail respondent. Fully half of the customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital are multiple direct mail respondents, so they're indexing at 161. And I don't know if you've noticed this trend, but it's a lot harder to achieve a high index value when there's only 2 value ranges in the variable. So something like county, right, where there's 3,200 counties in the U.S., it's a lot easier to achieve an index of 374 when you have 3,200 counties to choose from, or income, right? It's a lot easier to get an index of 354 when you have 10 or 12 value ranges to choose from. When you get down to something like gender or male responsiveness, where you got man, woman, yes, no, it's a lot harder to achieve an index of 161. So it's that much more statistically salient. So an index of 161 again means that customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital are 1.61 times more likely than average to be a multiple direct mail responder. In addition to the fact that there's a good chance that variable would pop in a predictive model if we took this to the next level and built the logistic regression score, it is also an indication that direct mail marketing ought to figure prominently in the advertising channel mix for Pacific Park Animal Hospital if it does not already do so. These folks are fairly benevolently minded. They're charitable in their donor behavior across a multitude of categories. It's no surprise that the highest index is for animal donors, followed by children's donors, if they have, they're those nuclear families, and then by environmental donors. So those are your big 3, right? They love their kids, they care about the earth, and they love their animals.
They love their animals more than their kids.
No, only if you look at index. If you look at frequency, they love their kids more.
Right. Okay.
All right. Interests and hobbies, they're just sort of, this just becomes a big blob. One of the things about interests is they're not mutually exclusive, right? So you can have an interest in antiques and arts and children and donors and da-da-da-da-da. When you get into these nice suburban affluent neighborhoods, they tend to do a lot of online shopping, and direct mail shopping is where a lot of these interests come from, or there's various other feeds to the database, but basically 70-80% of them are popping in each of these interest and hobby areas, but so is the rest of the universe. So the only one that's really jumping out from an index standpoint is gift buying. Otherwise, there's really nothing to be found on this, other than it's kind of nice to see where their interests lie.
But that's good to know for our marketing purposes because we incorporate, charity into the membership. So that means that's probably a big deal for them. They like that, and and we can also keep that in mind for future offers, and everything they do could be, tied to a benevolent cause, and it'll probably carry some weight with this based on the statistic.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. We have these consumer vectors. Now there's two what we call geodemographic cluster models, right? One's called consumer vector and the other is called geovector. This one is more granular, this one is less granular. I'll explain what I mean. So what we do here is we group people together based on urbanization, age, gender, income, and family type. And what happens when you have, and no one household can fall in more than one of these categories, and we're looking at the top 12 categories. There's, I think, 500 if you do the math on all the possible combinations. The big one here is 16% of the customers fall in this one. They live in the suburbs, they're baby boomers, the mom is making the decision, and they're high-end families with kids. However, the highest index, even though it's only 4% of the file, right, and that's one of the problems with consumer vectors. They're too granular. You get to the fourth one, and you're falling afoul of that 5% threshold, or the fifth one. You're falling afoul of that 5% threshold for statistical relevancy. Even still, they're interesting to note and give great qualitative insight into these folks. So your index of 2,800, right, it means that these people are 28 times more likely than average to fall in this one geovector code, which is they live in the suburbs, they're baby boomers, the mom is making the decision, and they're high-income couples, largely empty nester couples. That's where you're seeing your great statistical distinction. The others are these two, right? This one is suburban Gen X, again, the female high-income nuclear families. This one is suburban baby boomers, female high-income couple nuclear families. And then down here you have another 1,500 index for suburban millennials, female high-income couples with children. So you start to see a trend emerging. These are very useful for if you're going to be doing variable image print and, or targeted digital, where you want to serve ads with great relevance based on the intended recipient. Now the geovectors have less granularity, and so they tend to pop in our predictive models more. There's only 4 dimensions to them, so you have urbanization, age, income, and families. And we've removed granularity from age, so you can only be spring, summer, autumn, or winter. And there's a slide that describes what they are, but they kind of coincide with the picture you might have of those. So there's 3 values for urbanization. You have suburban, urban, and rural. There's 4 values for age, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. 3 values for income, high, medium, and low, and then 3 values for family type, singles, couples, and families. By removing granularity, because we looked at income, we saw 0 to 15,000, 15 to 24,000, 25 to 34,000, and so on. It helps group them into more statistically practical buckets. And what we see here is this one category, 3323, makes up more than 1/4, almost 1/3 of the customers. And those are people who live in the suburbs. They're in the autumn of life, meaning 45 to 64. They're high income, and they're families. That right there, if that's the only thing you learned from this whole model, is a very important one. But then look at this index of 450 for 23, 22. You got to be careful with it because it falls short of that 5% threshold for statistical relevancy. still important to note that people who are in the suburbs, they're in the summer of life, and they're high-income couples. So these are like affluent, young, urban, suburban couples are very likely to shop at Pacific Park Animal Hospital, frequent or patronize. So that is the profile, all right? If we look at the predictive scoring model, now this is just an example, but happens to be one with some relevance because some of these are some of the variables that would pop. What we do is we take the attributes that carry the greatest punch in the profile and we assign a mathematical weight to them. And it's the combination of these variables. Remember, and so this is a bit of an oversimplification, right? If you look at age, we see that there's a number of age categories that are popping in the model, but we're only showing one bar here. This value of 0.2 as the mathematical coefficient is really a median value for all of these variable ranges within the value. So it just tells you in relative terms what is most important, what is least important, and what are we throwing out, which is everything that doesn't appear on here. But what we do is, so you might think of it as, if they're 18 to 24, then it might be times 0.2. Or if they're 25 to 34, it might be times 0.3. Or if they're 35 to 44, it might be times 0.25. Or, so it becomes this big mathematical algebraic equation about as long as your arm. Remember that on the universe, we have the same variables configured in the same value ranges. So age from 25 to 34, and 35 to 44, income from 75 to 100,000, 100 to 125, etc. We have that same set of value ranges on the actual customers of PPAH as we have on their prospect universe. That's how we are able to create the numerator and denominator comparisons of those two groups. So we build the model based on the characteristics of these guys. We can then go apply it to these 2.9 million. So in the sample algorithm, again, we saw that the most prominent predictive driver was gender, followed by household type, then age, presence of children, etc. We take that algebraic equation and we apply it to the reference universe. And if there were 2.9 million in 100% of the population, then there would be 290,000 in 10% of the population, or 145,000 in 5%. So here's your, when we apply the scoring algorithm, here's your highest scoring 5% or your highest scoring 145,000. Here's your lowest scoring 145,000, and there are 18 other gradients of 145,000 in between. Now, to verify that the model is predicting what we said it would predict, that is propensity to become a new customer of Pacific Park Animal Hospital, we take the actual customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital and we blindly seed them in with that scored prospect universe, and then retroactively look to detect where they fall along the scoring scale. If the model's predicting what we said it would predict, we'd better see the highest aggregation of these actual paying customers falling toward the high end of the scoring scale and then falling apart toward the bottom end of the scoring scale. So you're always going to see this sort of a hockey stick shape to what we call the gains chart. Then to measure the magnitude of the model or its effectiveness in helping us to cherry pick low-hanging fruit prospects that are most likely to become new customers of Pacific Park Animal Hospital, we look to see how much taller each of these gray bars is in comparison to its corresponding red bar. What we see at the top end of the scale is this gray bar is 5.72 times taller than its corresponding red bar, which means that if we target our advertising message to these highest scoring 145,000 prospects, they are 5.7 times more likely than average to become a customer. Now that doesn't translate to a lift in response performance of 572%. It typically translates to a lift of 20 to 40% over established baseline. So if you've been doing, for example, direct mail marketing to prospective households around the facility of Pacific Park Animal Hospital, and say you've been getting a 2% response rate, you can expect by targeting these highest scoring prospects to boost that 2% response rate up to something like 2.4 to 2.8%. That is a 20 to 40% lift over baseline. So you're going to generate more revenue from fewer prospects by getting a higher response rate to your advertising messages. That's one side of the coin of where predictive modeling brings greater punch to your marketing and advertising efforts. The other side of the coin is illustrated in this line graph down here. So if we take the variables populated in this bar chart, that is the 2.9 million scored prospects and the 2,100 validation customers, and you plot them as a line graph, what you have here is the 2,100 customers on the vertical axis and the 2.9 million prospects here on the horizontal axis. If you blindly seed these 2,100 customers in with this 2.9 million scored prospect universe and you don't apply the model, you have to go knock on 2.9 million doors to find all 2,100 of these guys. That's what the random line illustrates, the red line. But by using the model, as illustrated by the gray line, what we see is that we find about 70% of those actual paying customers falling in the top 30% of the scored prospect universe. It means we're bringing great statistical precision not only to who we ought to target, but who we ought to eliminate, so we won't put at risk those precious finite marketing dollars that we might otherwise have frittered away targeting prospects who are unlikely to ever become customers. So there's sort of a double advantage where you're making money and saving money at the same time by bringing this type of statistical precision to your customer acquisition, advertising, and marketing efforts. Again, this was a sample only. This is not the actual predictive model for Pacific Park Animal Hospital. That would be something that we would take under advisement in a collaborative fashion in follow-on steps, assuming that it makes sense to all parties concerned.
Got it.
All right. So I kind of threw a lot of math at you. I tried to keep it as conversational or anecdotal as possible, but and as highly illustrated as possible. But did I explain the findings from the model with sufficient clarity, or are there any questions for me at this point?
No, I think it's great clarity, and a lot of my clients are doctors, so I think they will appreciate the way you went through this and explaining it, and I think you brought a lot of value to at least having this report, and then I'd love to talk more about what would be the next, what are some of the things we can do now from an execution standpoint, but maybe we should cut this call off and then maybe do those after or offline. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I have briefed Steve at great length about the most likely next steps, but I'm happy to jump into the fray anytime. I have another meeting coming up in a few minutes. I'm actually running about 15 minutes late for it because we got started a little late, but I'm happy to circle back and have that conversation at your convenience later today or tomorrow.
Okay. That sounds great. Steve, you have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good. Let's do that. Let John go, and then we'll talk, and then we'll visit with him offline tomorrow or Wednesday or whatever.
Very good. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time. Sorry about the foul up with all those people canceling at the last minute, but glad we were able to reconvene.
Yeah, thank you, John, for being flexible.
All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye now.
Okay, thanks, John. Bye.